You know where they ought to hold the next presidential debate, assuming they hold another presidential debate? In a swamp, because it's the swamp that sponsors these things. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, I came across a story in The Pulse today. It's an investigative piece done by, his name just went away. Here it is, Rahim Kassam, and he does some great investigative journalism. And this one is on one of the members of the Commission on Presidential Debates, the society formed in 1988 to put on these presidential debates. And her name is Antonia Hernandez. She's president and CEO of the California Community Foundation, which sounds like one of those nice, well-meaning groups. But it turns out she's affiliated with a George Soros-affiliated group called the Transition Integrity Project. Again, another one of those nice-sounding names that promises street fights to secure a Biden victory. And I think maybe we've seen one or two of those going on in recent months. And she also has ties to a group connected to the Chinese Communist Party. That's right, the CCP, which isn't actually communist anymore because nobody believes in that nationalizing everything or dictatorship of the proletariat because there's no money in it. But they certainly believe in upending this country as a part of a great power competition. And gentlemen, this got me into looking at the rest of the commission members to see exactly who runs these awful things that aren't really debates. And it turns out it's a bunch of swampland creatures. Listen to this. We've got Frank Fahrenkopf, a Republican, 81 years old. Dick Morris said this guy is no longer at the top of his game back in 2016, 4 years ago. There's Kenneth Wallach, another co-chair. He worked on a presidential campaign for a Democrat, George McGovern, in 1972. I was 3 years old. I'm 51 now. There's also Dorothy F. Ridings, a third co-chair. She graduated college in 1961, 8 years before I was born. Scott, I think you said that's the year you were born. The members of the actual commission, those are the chairs. John Danforth, who is probably the most rhino Republican who was ever a Republican in name only. Charles Gibson of CBS News, no friend of the right for sure. John Griffin, managing director at Allen & Company, a privately held boutique investment firm in New York City. We can guess which way they lean. Richard Parsons, 72-year-old former head of Citigroup. He's a Republican, but he's old and he's never Trump. Yvonne Howe of Cove Partners, another equity firm. I'm seeing a trend here. Jane Harman, former Democratic Congress critter from California. Olympia Snowe, Republican former senator, and her picture is in the dictionary next to Rhino. And Newton N. Minow, 94-year-old Democrat who first served under JFK in 1961. Bill, when we talk about draining the swamp, which President Trump has been talking about since he launched his first campaign 5 years ago now, wouldn't this have been a great place to start?
Yeah. I think a bigger issue than the fact that the Commission on Presidential Debates has a number of outright communists and street agitators. I think a better question is, why do we continue to allow these people to moderate the debates? How many times have we watched this? Sometimes it's just merely bias and an attitude and stuff. We saw this with the vice presidential debates, but there are other times when the moderator throws themselves in front of the Republican in order to save the Democrat. And we saw that with Wallace. We saw it obviously with Candy Crowley and so on.
That's the worst.
So the big question is, why do we keep agreeing to this? And I think it's because we think fundamentally that we expect people to be fair because we generally are fair. And this is a sign of mental insanity at this point, to continue to walk into these ambushes and just take this. I personally think that I don't know. I certainly would rather see a debate with no moderator than with these moderators. But my opinion on what a debate moderator should do is, I think he should be pretty much exactly like a fight referee. In other words, stay out of the way. Don't just stay out of the way. Let them go back and forth unless they get into a clutch, right? And then if they just lock up, then just get your hand in there, separate them, and then get out of the way again. Because what we've seen in all of these debates, these last two especially, was just when it was starting to get interesting, just when one person is talking to the other about their record. It's like, I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President, your time is up. Mr. Vice President, sir, I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President, shut up. I don't care. This idea of like 2-minute answers on fundamental national issues is nuts. And I think it benefits them. I think we should just say, hey, we are going to cover these topics in this order. We'll get as many of them in as we can, but we're not going to tell you to stop talking and going to get in the middle of this thing just so we can cover 9 topics instead of 3.
Yeah, the moderators are a problem. The moderators are a symptom, I think, of the problem, to be more accurate. This week's presidential debate, the one that got canceled because President Trump got COVID and Joe Biden doesn't want to be 12 feet away with 2 plexiglass walls in between because he's so fearless and stuff. Tonight, Wednesday night's moderator was supposed to be CNN's Steve Scully, who I didn't actually know that much about, other than that he's the guy that answers the phone at C-SPAN and talks to the callers. And he does it with a grace and gentleness, and I always like that about him. But it turns out, and this is the guy selected by all the swamp creatures and the street agitator on the Presidential Debate Commission, it turns out Scully is just as big a part of the swamp as any of them, really. He was an intern for Joe Biden in his Senate office 30 years ago. He served in the communications department at Ted Kennedy's old Senate office. He's been in Washington for decades, just like the rest of these people. And Scott, it occurs to me that maybe one of the problems with the moderators isn't so much that they lean too far to the left, although I do think that is a problem. Maybe the problem isn't so much that they're a part of the swamp that so badly needs to be drained, at least if you ask me. Maybe the problem is that the moderators, because of all this celebrity that surrounds the TV news, think they're just as much a part of the show as the candidates are.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because there are positions like this throughout our society that are, in most times, would be considered to be innocuous or meaningless or just, it's kind of an honor to be appointed to the commission, but you don't really do anything. You don't really have any impact. But Republicans need to learn more and more where these hinge points are in inside and outside of government. It's at the local level. It's funny because nobody really pays any attention to what the local zoning board does until you want to do something to your property. And then you go to the local zoning board and they say, okay, why don't you talk to us for an hour and a half and then come back 3 weeks from now and talk to us again, and then we'll delay that and you'll talk to us again. And by the way, you're paying an attorney all this time to talk to us. So it's a very important role, but it's kind of drudgery. It's not sexy. And maybe this is one of these kind of roles. The debate on presidential, or the Commission on Presidential Debates only comes up, quadrennially, and doesn't seem like it would be a big deal, but actually can be influential in the process. Now, Steve, maybe you can correct me in this, but my understanding was that this commission, when they sit down with the presidential campaigns, they try to hammer out an agreement between the campaigns as to what the format of the debates is going to be. So the moderator is constantly reminding the candidates about the ground rules to which they agreed beforehand. Do you get the sense that those ground rules are being dictated by the debate commission, or that the debate commission merely fostered the brokering of a set of agreements and that the candidates themselves didn't want to have longer than 2 minutes to talk?
Oh, that very well could be, which is why I like Bill's idea so very much of getting rid of the moderator altogether. That said, I don't think that is going to happen, unfortunately. And it may, Scott, I have the feeling it's for the exact reason you just mentioned. There are so few candidates that can go on for more than 2 minutes and still make sense. We don't have any Lincoln. We don't have any Douglas around these days. Maybe if we had a better debate format, we could encourage that kind of talent, that kind of cream to rise to the top again. At the Philadelphia Convention of 1787, when they were discussing the draft versions of the U.S. what came to be known as the U.S. Constitution, during one particular day in June, Alexander Hamilton stood up and held forth for 6 hours. He spoke all day. And then he was he shocked the convention so much by his suggestion of essentially having a president that was an elective monarch that nobody said anything. They adjourned the meeting and tried to forget what he had done. But 6 hours straight. You reminded me of an old Rita Rudner gag about a friend of hers who was in labor for 36 hours. And Rita said, I don't even want to do anything that feels good for that long. Anyway, I came up with what I think might be a better way to do these debates. Basically, abolish the commission. It's pretty much just a paid sinecure for otherwise useless people or street agitators. It's just another paycheck for swampland creatures. We don't need it, and I think we've seen time and time again the candidates don't need it. Instead, a very simple thing, and you have to get the TV news networks in on this too to make it work. Each candidate would select one moderator. We'd have a 2-moderator debate. Now, candidate A would choose the moderator for candidate B. Candidate B would choose the person to ask questions of candidate A, and give each candidate a couple of vetoes, just like when you're selecting for a jury. You know, the defense doesn't like that jury, they can kick them out without cause, and you settle on 12. We only need to settle on 2. But here's the trick. Not only do you have to take questions from somebody that your opponent picked, but if either one of the candidates were to chicken out and say, no, I'm out of vetoes and I still don't like this guy, I'm bailing, then the surviving candidate would get the same 90 minutes of commercial-free TV time being interviewed by the moderator of their own choice, thus incentivizing everybody to stay in the game and maybe, just maybe, to make sure this thing actually gets pulled off, to be kind of fair in choosing the moderator for the other side. Couldn't be worse than we've got, could it? Let's give it a shot. See you in 2024. I'm Steve Green. Thanks so much for watching. From Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, I wanted to remind you that Right Angle is made possible by the paying members at BillWhittle.com. And if you want to keep this kind of stuff on the air, we need you on board. Click on over to BillWhittle.com, hit the join button, become a member. We would love to have you on board. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.